Well, welcome everybody. Welcome back to Coffee with Krav. Just have a few things that I just want to go over before we start. So first, I see that vaccinations are out there. I just want to say, get the vaccinations. Don't have an argument like I had with my brother. Oh, I'm not going to get it. I'm not going to. Don't do that. I had to convince my brother to go out and get the vaccination. So go get the appointments, get the vaccinations. Science. It's all about science. Let's get herd immunity. Let's get back to some normalcy, and things will start to get better. Let's make 2021 the best year ever. Also, being that I like to talk about all different kinds of things and personal things. So there's something personal that's going on right now in my life, and we've done 21 of these episodes, so I feel that I can share. And for those of you that have pets, and especially for those of you that have dogs, you can probably understand. My pet Jojo is not doing well. She's on her last leg. It's a very emotional time in the Kravietz household. She's 14 years old, and she's been with us. She's been with me for all 21 Coffee with Kravs. In fact, it was her idea. Thank you, Jojo, for thinking of Coffee with Krav. So, oops, just want to show everybody Jojo. Here's a picture. That's a picture of Jojo. So what I need is everybody to say a prayer for Jojo as she's not doing well. Okay, I don't want to bum everybody out. We got a great guest. We're gonna have a great time here today. So we have Fran, and I'm gonna mispronounce your last name. So Racioppi? Racioppi. Okay. Fran Racioppi. All right. So Fran Racioppi is a highly decorated veteran and an expert in business and security operations. He's a well-respected executive in the private sector, a leader of diverse, complex organizations, a driver of personal and professional change. Fran is the founder of FR6 and a member of the Talent War Group, where he brings organizational change management through leadership development, team building, and coaching in talent management and operational efficiency. Fran was awarded by the FBI and DHS for his leadership and innovation. Fran also served 13 years in the U.S. Army as a Green Beret, deployed 3 times to Iraq in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation New Dawn. From 2013 to 15, Fran supported Operation Enduring Freedom, where he coordinated special operation combat terrorist organizations throughout Africa. Fran, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And I am sorry to hear about Jojo. Our dog is 17, and we are in the same position looking down that road. So I feel for you.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, Fran, you grew up off the shores of Mass and Rhode Island. How was it growing up there?
I think growing up here gives you a certain perspective on the world that you realize when you leave here. So I grew up in Rhode Island. Then we lived in Massachusetts, right outside of Boston, during my middle school and high school years. And then I went to college at Boston University for undergrad. So my world was a little bit small. We traveled a lot. My family was Italian by heritage. So we went to Italy and Europe, and we traveled to many places. I was really fortunate. But I had never spent an extended amount of time outside of the New England area until I went in the Army. And I went in the Army, and there's a couple of things that happened to me very quickly where I said, wow, I didn't even know what that was. One was shooting a gun. That was completely foreign to me because it's just not something that's huge up in the Northeast. And so you go to basic training, you have all these people who are your peers, and they know how to do all these things that you've never done. And you're nervous, and they help you to get better at it. And another one that I'll never forget was chewing tobacco. I had never seen chewing tobacco. And so I had no idea what these people were putting in their mouth. And so it was an interesting experience having to be
Don't tell me you
explained.
swallowed it.
No, I never touched it actually.
Oh, okay, good.
I never did in all my years. And so it was very interesting listening to somebody from the deep South explain to me the different benefits that it brings you. And I'm like, I don't think so.
Nah,
Not for me.
not for me either. So your family were avid are avid sailors, racing sailboats. So growing up there, how was that, learning about that?
That's one of the nicest things about, I think, living in the Northeast is the access to water. It becomes part of your culture. There's a theory that people talk about the healing nature of water, and they speak about how you can have all of these problems on terrestrial land and on the land, and then you get out in the ocean, or you get out really on any body of water, and the perspective changes. Your perspective on what you're doing in the moment changes, your perspective on life changes. And that's always something that's resonated with me about the ocean, about boats, and the challenge. I was fortunate. My dad was a huge sailor his whole life. We were on boats from when I was born. We had a boat, and we always did growing up. And so then I got into racing sailboats competitively. You learn the most in small boats, the ones that is just maybe you and one other, and they tip over if you don't, when you start making mistakes or getting too aggressive. So you learn a tremendous amount, and then that brings you into bigger boats. And that's something that I've always tried to stay near to. I work now with an organization called Sail Ahead, which I'm the race director for a veteran service organization that teaches.
Is that a Long Island firm?
It is. They are.
Yeah. Huntington,
they're
right?
They're out of Huntington. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the boats are in Oyster Bay, and then they do a lot with Centerport Yacht Club. And so a couple of years ago, when I lived in New York, I joined up with them and immediately saw the value in what they were doing, because their goal is to help veterans cope with the need to have a team and the loneliness that often comes from your transition. And a lot of veterans, unfortunately, they take their own life. And there's about 22 a day is the average veterans that take their own life. And Sail Ahead's goal is to give an outlet for that through water, through getting veterans on the water. And one of the things that I think is often overlooked in people's transition out of the military is the sense of team, because we speak a lot about it. You speak a lot about it in companies. I mean, I coach people and teams and companies on building teams and building organizations, but you rarely ever coach someone on what do you do when you leave the team, when you got to turn around and say, well, I don't have this group of people that I've been with every single day that share the same values, the same culture, they have the same goals, and they're not there anymore. And that's a tough thing. That's a tough thing coming out of the military. And the longer you served, and often the more elite organizations that you served in, the tighter knit that team is. And so when you lose that, it's hard to look around and say, well, what can I replace it with? And so sailing, I believe, provides that outlet, because you have to learn a skill. And so you're not only on the water with all of the attributes that the water brings you to separate you from land, but you have to learn a new skill, and then you have to be competitive in it. And there's so many things in those tasks, and the bigger the boat, the more challenges that come with it. And then you have to figure out how to race it. Not only do you have to know how to operate it, but then you have to race it. And there's a competitive edge to that. And you're building that team. You can't do it alone. And so that's something that I've always tried to stay close to.
That's interesting. So you have a sailing family. You were on the crew team. You love the water. So how'd you wind up in the Army? There's a disconnect there. What's going on there?
So I'll give you the full version, because it's a little bit better than the abridged version. But I wanted to be a journalist. When I went to Boston University, I went to Boston University because it was the #1 communications school for broadcast journalism. And my entire goal was Tom Brokaw. I have learned in the last several years that when I speak to a lot of people now, they don't know who Tom Brokaw is, which kind of scares me, because it's making me feel very old. And so I wanted to be Tom Brokaw. He was my hero. I read all his books. I watched him every night on the news. And I believed that he really from during that time period when you still kind of had objective journalism.
Mhm.
He really was the litmus test for objective journalism, and that was a great role model. And so I went to BU. I joined the crew team because I had the wherewithal to think that if I don't play a sport, I thought I was going to play college football, but I chose the school over the ability to play football. And so I had some opportunities to go to some Division III schools, but BU was the best academically school that I got into. And I said, well, I got to go there and I'll figure it out. And so I said, I need to play a sport because otherwise I'm probably going to get myself involved in some things that I don't want to be involved in. And so I walked onto the rowing team, and I got a scholarship actually my sophomore year.
Oh, great.
And then I had a scholarship the remaining 3 years. And with that meant no ROTC, no other extracurricular activities. That was it. All rowing 2 times a day, 3 seasons a year. That was it. And so I decided that I was going to be a war correspondent shortly after we invaded Afghanistan after 9/11. That was my junior year. And this was life-changing experience for absolutely everybody. And it changed journalism because it was the first war, Afghanistan. And then in 2003, when we went into Iraq, it was the first time where you had embedded journalism, where we had the First World War was the birth of CNN. I mean, it's not World War. The first Gulf War in 1991 was the birth of CNN, where you had this kind of live stream of what was going on. But Afghanistan and specifically Iraq were the first times where reporters were actually with forward elements. And that was changing journalism, and it was changing the way that we consume what these conflicts looked like. And I said, well, I'm going to be a war correspondent. And so I dedicated myself to that for the last couple of years. But then as I watched these embedded journalists, I watched these gentlemen with long hair and beards, riding horses, what I called saving the world, and really making a difference in the operations they were conducting, those folks being special operations forces. And I said, well, that looks pretty cool, but maybe I'll still be a journalist. And then I watched an interview with Geraldo Rivera, a very polarizing figure for those in journalism, but he was with an infantry squad. I don't remember if it was the Army or the Marines, and he got into a firefight with them. And they were running down the road, and he pulled out a pistol of his own, which he wasn't supposed to have, and he fell down and tripped over it. and all the soldiers start yelling at him. And I looked at that and I said, nope, I can't do that. I don't want to be that guy. I need to be the other guy. And so no way, I'm going into the Army. If I want to be a journalist later on in life, I can do it. And so I made that decision that I would go to officer candidate school, went down to the recruiting office late in my senior year, and applied and got accepted to officer candidate school in the Army.
What would your parents say when you said you wanted to do that? You don't come from a military family, right?
So my grandfathers on both sides were in the military. My dad's father was actually in the Italian army as a conscript. So all of my grandparents are
okay. So you do have it,
and they came over in the 40s. Or in the 50s, actually, right after the war, except my mother's father came when he was 8 years old in about 1920. He came to the U.S. So my father's father was conscripted into the Italian army, and outwardly said it was the worst thing he ever had to do and wasn't interested in it and did the minimum. My mother's father was actually in the Corps of Engineers. He grew up here in Rhode Island. He was the valedictorian for his class at URI. And then he went into the Corps of Engineers, and he worked on the Manhattan Project, developing mustard gas in their mustard gas program. And so he was one of the lead scientists in that program. And so it was always something that fascinated me. And so there was a little bit of that history. But it was a different time back then too. So in the time that I went in October of 2003, we were things started to heat up tremendously in Iraq. Afghanistan had been going on for a couple of years. So my parents I don't want to say they were not pleased, but they were very cautious.
Right. Well, there's probably no tougher group to get into than the Green Beret. What made you choose? And I'm fast forwarding this, and I'll come
Sure.
back. But what made you choose the Green Beret?
They're the best. It's just something that for me, it's about being the best, at the best that I can be. I think later on in life, you make that distinction. Earlier on in life, you look at everyone else and say, I have to be better than everybody else. Later on in life, you say, now I have to be the best version of myself that I can be. I was very fortunate in retrospect to look back and say the best version of myself that I could be was one of the best. There truly are the 1% of the 1%. And the Ballad of the Green Beret says 300 men will test today, and only one will wear the Green Beret. So they're the best.
Well, speaking of testing, let's talk about the training. The Special Force Assessment and section is 24 days of hell. Then you go through Special Forces qualification course that includes 5 phases of training. All that sounds absolutely impossible. How did you survive?
One day at a time. And I mean, these challenges are not unlike challenges that people face in business, they face in their personal life. I mean, you're presented with a complex set of challenges. Those challenges are going to stress you physically, emotionally, they're going to stress you mentally, and how you balance that is what will determine your success. So the very first thing that I focused on in my preparation was the physical side of things, because there's things that are controllable and things that are not controllable. One of the things that you can always control is your level of physical fitness, because that's what drives the mental and emotional side of your well-being. The better you feel, and I knew the better I felt, the better I prepared I would be mentally and emotionally to tackle the challenges. So if I wasn't in pain physically because of no sleep, lack of food, the constant physical challenges that were presented to me, if I could minimize that as much as possible, then my mental bandwidth would not be focused on calloused feet or sore muscles or tiredness. And that mental energy could then be channeled on the actual challenges in front of me and how I would compose myself mentally and emotionally to combat those. And so that's how I entered the selection process, the 24-day selection process. And it was one day at a time.
How many people were in there, and how many people survived that?
It starts with several hundred. And I don't remember exactly how many we had in my graduating class, but I would say somewhere around 20 to 30% actually made it through. But it's one day at a time. It's one exercise at a time. It's not about on day 1 saying, oh, I'm looking forward to day 15, or on day 15, I can't wait to get to day 21. It's just, what do I need to do right now? Okay, right now I have to go for a run. And they challenge you. They don't tell you how far the run is. They take away your watch. They don't tell you anything except about the route. They just bring you together and they say, here's your packing list. Be here at this time. You show up at that time. You have a certain amount of weight in your rucksack or your bag, and you have the right equipment. And then they'll tell you this event is a run or this event is a ruck march. And do your best. Stay in between the cones. Don't deviate from the cones. Go. And then you go. And that may be a mile. It could be 2 miles. It could be 5 miles. You have no idea. You just got to go out there and do your best. And so they're judging you on how your consistency level. And if you're consistently in the front and you're doing the best that you can every single time, then over the course of those evolutions, you're going to set a baseline pattern for how you perform against those tasks. But you can't look at it on the morning and say, I can't wait to get to 3 or 4 evolutions down the road tomorrow. You have to say, what's the first thing I have to do? Okay, I have to run. All right, well, when I'm done running, I'll reset my mind. If I'm in physical shape, I won't be in too much pain. And then I'll reset my mind on the next task. And then whatever that task is, I'm going to execute that.
What was the toughest thing? Like, you just, they said, let's do this. And you're like, even though you have mental toughness, even though you're in great shape, even though, you're ready for, you're like, oh, I can't believe we got to now do that.
The toughest event was probably the final night for me, because it's called the Trek. It's famous, and no secrets I'm giving away, but it's somewhere over 20 miles, 20 to 25 miles. I'm not sure. They don't tell you the exact distance, but it's the last night, and you've gone through this thing, and you haven't slept, you haven't eaten, your body is physically broken down, your mind is mentally broken down, and now you have to go out there and you have an all night event. And that's the final indicator of, do you have what it takes to get through this? And do you have what it takes to get through this, knowing that you're going to be assessed against your past body of work. So you don't get to go in it and say, well, I just have to get through it. It doesn't matter how I finish. I just have to finish and then I'm done to tomorrow. No, it's still an exercise. It's still an assessment of your performance. And so I had finished in the top 1, 2, 3 of every event that I was in the entire selection process. So going into that last night, okay, I knew that I have no choice but to perform in this. And so you also know that it's the end. And so I said to myself, this is it. I'm leave it all here. I did it or I didn't. And I have to leave everything here. And for the whole night, I ran ahead of the pack. I didn't see anybody. No one was around me. And you come up on the checkpoints, and the instructors, got to a point where they were calling my roster number. Is that you? Yep, that's me. Okay, I'll keep going. And then I knew I was coming up to the end. And then shortly before sunrise, I started hearing footsteps behind me. And now I start getting nervous. Is it a boar? Is it a wolf? Is it an animal? It can't be something. Nobody can catch me. I've been running this thing all night. I haven't seen anybody. And sure enough, a guy caught me, and he caught me, and we kind of play the little game. He catches up, I pick it up, he picks it up, I pick it up, but he had another gear that I didn't have. And he passed me. And as he's passing me, I'm slowing down. I feel myself slowing down, and the distance between him and I is increasing. And now my feet start hurting, my knees start hurting, my back's hurting, my neck. I can feel the weight of my pack on my shoulders, all these things that I hadn't felt in the last 8 hours since I started. There had been no pain. I had felt great because I was in the front. Now this one guy passes me, and now I'm at a decision point. What am I going to do here? Because he's not getting faster. I'm getting slower. I'm getting slower because now the physical side of me is taking over, and mentally I'm not keeping up. Mentally I'm falling behind, and I'm letting myself physically fail. And so I really thought to myself, very consciously, I have a decision here. I can let this continue and possibly fail. And maybe I don't know where the next person is. Maybe they're right behind him. Maybe they're an hour behind. I have no idea. Right. But if one more person passes me, maybe there's one behind him. And I knew that, generally, as you get further towards the back, there's more and more folks, right? So who are closer together. And so I said, well, what happens if everybody starts passing me? And what if I finish 5th, 10th, 50th, 100? They're going to look at this and they're going to say, well, he quit. Right. And am I going to quit in the last leg of the last exercise, and every day of my life look back and say, you were mentally broken because one guy passed you? Is one guy passing you really that big of a deal? No, it's not. It really isn't. And so I made that mental shift in my mind, and I said, you're just going to deal with this. You're going to internalize it. It's not there. And that was something I learned from rowing about channeling the mental and separating and then channeling the mental and physical pain, because rowing is no other sport that brings you from dead resting heart rate to lactic acid shock in a 6-minute time frame. And so you learn to separate that, because when your body goes into lactic acid shock, you still have half the race. And so you have to separate these things. And so that's what I told myself. You're just going to get through it. You're going to get there. And I did. And I picked it back up. I felt, that pain, didn't go away completely. I was a little upset, but I was able to rechannel those thoughts, focus on getting it done. And I finished second. And I only finished second by about a minute. The next guy behind me was like 15 minutes behind.
Oh, well, that's a great story. So I had John Cho, a Navy SEAL, on Coffee with Krav last year. And he said that the Navy SEAL training was the most difficult that's out there. And now you're saying Green Beret is more difficult. What's the story here? Who's right on this thing? Come on.
this is the concept. Normally, when somebody says, I spoke with a Navy SEAL, I look at them and I say, I'll reserve my comments to myself. There's a great camaraderie between the Green Berets and the Navy SEALs, and there's great partnership there. What I always say to my brothers from the SEALs is that they have a different job. And the job of the Green Beret is very different from the job of the Navy SEAL, which is very different from the job of an Air Force pararescueman, which is a big component of special operations in the Air Force, and same for the Marines. And so there's a common set of recruiting tactics that are used and character selection tactics that are used across all special operations that are set by Special Operations Command. But the combination of the specific traits that is required to become a phenomenal Navy SEAL versus a Green Beret is very different, because the mission is very different. And so they're equally as challenging, just different.
That's an excellent, politically correct answer. That's been rehearsed somehow, but excellent. No, both of you guys are great, and you're both Superman. So it's and we all appreciate all the things that you do. Well, let's get into the deployment. So you deployed 3 times in Iraq, support of operations Iraqi Freedom and Operation New Dawn back in the early 2000s. There was a lot going on in Iraq at that time. What was your memories of what was going on at the time?
My first deployment was in 2005, and I went for a year as an infantry platoon leader. And that was a very difficult time. That was the height of the Sunni Shia strife, the height of the sectarian conflict, and we were in a particularly difficult area during that time. It was a challenge. It was a challenge to lead folks during that period, because to some extent it was a time period of all-out conflict, and you could kind of do whatever you wanted. But at the same time, you couldn't. I mean, there's things you can't do, even in war. And so keeping the morale of folks up over a year period of time, I say this on the back end of talking about one evolution at a time. You kind of have to look at it the same way. You can't look at it and say, I'm going to be here for a year, because that's overwhelming. To look at it and say, I've got to get through today. I've got to get my team and through today. I have to get my organization through today, and even say, I have to get through this one patrol, this one mission. If I get to the next one, we'll plan the next one, and we'll plan the next day. And checking in with folks and being an engaged leader is one, I believe, of the most critical things that you can do for folks in those high stress environments. And that translates whether it's in the military or whether it's in the business world, and you're working to on any sort of project, or you're working to build an organization. You have to understand what people are going through, understand what's happening in their personal lives, understand what motivates and drives them, because what drives certain people is not going to drive others. And so understanding your team on a fundamental level to understand their drivers of their highest levels of performance will keep that team together for those long.
How large was your team?
My first deployment was 40. I had over 40, because I was an infantry platoon leader.
Did you lose anyone?
I was fortunate in that I did not lose anyone out of my platoon. My company, we did have some casualties in my company, and I had some individuals in my platoon who were wounded, but I didn't lose anybody. I didn't have anybody who was killed, fortunately.
Did you converse with the locals there? Was that part
every day? Yeah. Every day. That was a big part of all of my deployments and everything that I did. And I think that was tremendous in teaching me the value of networking. It taught me the value of camaraderie and how you have to have a collective effort to get things done. I believe that's one of the critical things that separates Green Berets in their job performance from anybody else, is that you have to be able to go to an organization that may or may not want your help, in a remote region of the world and find a way to identify with those individuals in that organization to show them the value of what you bring, and then get them to want to do it for themselves, not only while you're there, but do it once you leave. And the lessons that you learn from going to places like Iraq, I've been to about 26 countries across Africa. When you go to these various countries and you work with these folks of all different backgrounds and nationalities and cultural differences, you start to learn that their input has to be valued. And just like when you're an executive going to a new company or in your own company that you may have been there for a long time, you can never walk in the room and say, I know everything and you're going to listen to everything that I tell you. Their input matters. They live it every day. People on, at junior levels on teams are the people who have to execute so many of the things that leadership puts out there. But that means that they need to be involved in the actual planning of it and the development of those plans. And so if leadership can sit above that and reserve decision-making authority, but the input of everybody is what matters. And interacting with the locals across the world, as I was fortunate enough to do, really teaches you that their value is important.
Yeah, those are great lessons. Now, you would also serve from 2009 to 2011 as Mountaineering Special Forces Detachment Commander. What does that mean? And what was your mission?
I was the commander of a special forces team. So they're called operational detachments. So I had a 12-man special forces team. Every team has a specialty. And our specialty was mountaineering, which was great for me because alongside growing up on the water, I grew up skiing from when I was skiing since I was 18 years old. And that was a big part of my childhood, big part of my life, still is a big part of my life. I had my daughter on skis when she was in the house, when she could first start walking around just on the skis to get used to it. And we're going to do the same thing with my son now. So going to a mountaineering team was really exciting. I will say that we spent about over half my time while I was on that team deployed to Iraq, where we didn't do a whole lot of mountaineering, but we found ways to train. You have to improvise, and we actually did find ways to train because we had the big 20 and 30 foot concrete walls that lined the base. And so we set those up as climbing walls where we drilled holes in them. We were able to do, rappelling, you do a lot of rope work. So we maintained our mountaineering proficiency, even though we were not in the mountains. And then when we were back in Colorado, because that's where I was stationed in Fort Carson, Colorado, in Colorado Springs, then we spent every moment that we didn't need to be doing something else, we spent up in the mountains.
Nice. Well, you also mentioned before that you spent a lot of time in Africa battling ISIS, Boko Haram, Shaba. You're like a modern day G.I. Joe. Please share some stories with everyone.
Africa, I believe, is one of the most dynamic places on Earth. I was very, very fortunate where I spent about equal time in East Africa as I did in West Africa, where I was running our partnership programs to develop special operations capabilities in the African nations. And so what I mean by that is we would go to the African partners in each one of the countries. We would identify a subset of their existing military that could be trained to a higher level. And then we would develop the plans to give them equipment, give them training, and then either go alongside them or deploy them to fight the region's conflicts, whether it was against Al-Shabaab in East Africa and the Somalia region, or the Lord's Resistance Army in Central Africa, Boko Haram down in the Nigeria centered area, or Al-Qaeda and ISIS up in the northern area of Africa. So going to each one of those countries was a tremendous experience that I will always be with me. I hope I get to go back to so many of them one day, because the cultures are so different, and the continent is so vast. Our maps I tell everybody our maps are wrong. The map of the globe is wrong. The proportions don't look like that. The country we once flew from Senegal to Somalia, which is the entire east-west. It's an 11-hour flight.
Mm,
And when you look at it on the globe, you see
smaller.
the U.S. is like this, and then Africa is like this, and it's actually the opposite. And I mean, that flight, if you were to go from like Germany down to South Africa, that's like a 10, 11-hour flight. I mean, those are tremendous distances of vastness, vast forest and desert, and some of the most remote regions on Earth. But those are inhabited regions. There's people who live there. There's people who don't know that there are major cities that we have, like we're accustomed to here in the U.S. And they live, it's a tribal culture, and it dates back thousands and thousands of years, and the trade routes that exist. And so it's just fascinating to go to all those countries and meet with the U.S. embassies and understand how they approach local interaction, to meet with the host nation military forces and build those relationships. I mean, I'm friends on LinkedIn with commanders from Niger and different countries in Africa, because that's how we've found each other since we've gotten out. And it's a really amazing and impactful experience to culturally understand how different people approach problems. And I think that when you take that back to the US, we tend to become so insulated in that everybody thinks like us, everyone approaches problems like us, everybody does what we do, but that's really not the case. And so it creates a worldliness about you, that you can begin to appreciate perspectives of people, even if they are of the same culture. It's one thing to sit across from somebody, on a rug in their home in a desert somewhere, and really have to understand their perspective. It's easy to lose that understanding when you're sitting in a conference room or in a boardroom and the person from the other department doesn't agree with what you said. It's much easier to forget that you had that past experience and say, no, you listen to me. This is what we're going to do. But actually what you have to do is remember that experience and then take a step back and say, okay, actually, well, tell me why you think that. Tell me why you believe that is a better way to do this, and then find that common ground.
Amazing lessons that you learn. I want to hear a story. I want to hear like the scariest or the most dangerous mission that you're ever on. I want to hear something that, it was, I turned the corner and there was these people, so give us one story about that.
I'll give you a story, but I think.
Well, what do you fear? What do you fear? What do you fear?
You fear failure. Is what you fear. This and the story that I can give you was my very first kind of complex operation when I was a platoon. Sorry, when I was a detachment commander, when I was in charge of a special forces team, and it was one of my first missions where we had some very bad individuals responsible for American casualties, and we did an operation to arrest them, and everything went wrong. Every single thing went wrong. You plan for contingencies. You plan for what happens if somebody gets shot. What happens if we make contact with the enemy? What happens if we have a vehicle breakdown? What happens if we have to cross this river? And so we planned for all these things, and we were partnered with this Iraqi Special Operations Unit. So it wasn't just the 12 of us. There was 150 folks out there, at that time in this operation. And we had everything go wrong. We showed up at the village. We were immediately in a firefight with the bad guys. They were escaping. They were running away. They crossed a river. We had to cross a river after them. And then one of my teammates was shot. And then one of the canoes that we were using to pursue these folks across the river capsized, and one of my Iraqi partners drowned.
Huh.
And so now here I am, new to the team. I'd been there a couple of weeks, and everything has happened at once. These contingencies start falling into place. And so for a moment, it's overwhelming, because you sit and say, well, I mean, how am I going to handle all this? I have, and then there's emotions behind this. I mean, my teammate is shot. This other individual who I know and had worked with is drowning. I have my guys are still in danger. They're still in engagement with the enemy. They're still under fire. There's people in the water now at more risk. And there comes a moment where you have to, again, make a decision, as I spoke about when I was in the last event selection. And that's, am I going to, as the leader, sit here and cave and not know what to do and throw my hands in the air and say everything is lost? Or do you take a deep breath and say, okay, how do we solve this complex challenge? And the way we planned for the complex challenge, we planned for each one of those things. We knew exactly what to do if we're engaged by the enemy. We knew exactly what to do if someone was shot. We knew exactly what to do if we had people in the water, or if you have another casualty. Then question is prioritization. How did I, as the leader, now have to prioritize each one of these things? What was the most pressing thing? Well, I had to stop the enemy engagement at that point. We need to stop the danger, because if we can stop the danger, then we can address our wounded teammate. We can have a recovery operation for the people in the water. But if we're still in this firefight, we still are in imminent danger. And so that was how I approached it. When that mission was over, and the result of the mission is that we ended up eliminating the two gentlemen who we were going after. And when I got back to that operations center, I felt defeat. Nobody said a word. It was a long drive, an hour and a half or 2 hours, I remember, drive back to our base from this remote village. And no one said one word, not a word on the radio, not a word in the vehicles, because it was the utmost failure. I believed I was going to be fired. I 100%. I said, as soon as I get in, I'm going to get out of the truck. Someone's going to come in and they're going to tell me you're fired. All this stuff went wrong. When I walked into the operations center, there was a standing ovation of folks, and I couldn't understand what happened. But the reality was we succeeded. The mission was to go out there, and the mission was to find the guys who were responsible for the killing of Americans. And that's what we did. We had suffered challenges, but we had overcome those challenges. And even though internally you see, they call it, you see how the sausage is made, you see how difficult this was to solve each one of these complex challenges, that any one of those things would derail someone who's not prepared, or an organization that's not prepared. If they encountered one of those situations, everything else would go by the wayside. But we conquered all of them. And we achieved the mission. And so it took a bit to sit back and say, well, okay, I guess we did do what we were supposed to do, but it's still a tough lesson. And you learn from those things, you get better and improve. But it's the fear of failure. You don't want to fail. You never want to fail. You don't want to fail in business. You don't want to fail in the military. You don't want to fail in athletics. You look at a guy like Tom Brady. Who just, every time he has a setback, it's, add 3 more years to his life, because the dedication to performance is so high. And so internalizing those times of failure and then using them to succeed moving forward is something that you learn about resiliency.
Well, Fran, I'm going to give you my own standing ovation, and I'm going to probably embarrass you a little bit, but I want to tell everybody listening the amount of military decorations, and I'm going to read each one. So just everybody hang in there. It's going to take a little while, but 3 bronze stars, Defense Service Medal, Joint Service Commendation Medal, Army Commendation Medal with Valor, 2 Army Commendation Medals, 3 unit commendations, Global War on Terrorism, Expeditionary Medal, Global War on Terrorism Service Medal, Army Service Ribbon, 2 Overseas Service Ribbon, and National Defense Service Ribbon. Dogging it, huh? Oh my God, it's like it's just amazing. So really, we saying collectively, and I'm representing everybody that's listening, that we really thank you for all the things that you've done. I want to switch gears a little bit, and just ask you kind of today with what's going on in the government and what they're doing, and what's going on in the world. Is there any parts of the world that the U.S. should be watching more carefully? And what's your biggest concern around the globe?
That's a very good question. We must be attuned to global events. We cannot be insular in our interaction with the rest of the world. That being said, there does have to be a level of parity in how we engage with the rest of the world. We, for a very long time, have given our partners and not our partners a lot of valuable resources that have come out of the US. And in terms of valuable resources, it's not only financial resources. We've given them industry resources. We've given them talent. We've had many people lose their lives in defense of other people's pursuits of their own freedom. And we can't abandon that. And we have to understand that we are the shiny city on the hill. We are the country, and we are the culture that everybody aspires to be. We are a country that there are very few countries in this world where people wake up every day and they say, I'm willing to give my life for the values that this country has here. And they put that country over the values of their family, their town, where they come from. And that's a foreign concept in a lot of foreign lands, where the family is first, the tribe is first in a lot of cultures, the village is before anything else. And in the United States, there's a vast majority of this country and of the people who wake up every day and say, my country and the values by which my country stands for is at the top of that list. And that's how I live my life. And so we, from an international relations standpoint, have to be conscious of how we're perceived in the rest of the world and the relationship that we have with the rest of the world. And there are value there. I always say that there's nothing wrong with talking. And I think we've lost that as a culture with the rise of technology. I mean, how many people do you talk to today and they say, text me? And now, right. I mean, and we do it all the time. Somebody calls, I was looking for my phone. It's charging because I use it too much. And so, and your phone rings and you think, oh, do I answer this phone? This person's going to keep me on the phone for so long. Why don't they just text me? And often you become annoyed that somebody has called you, and how dare this person call me, text me, send me an email. But that has created a divide. That has created that sense of relationship, that sense of partnership that comes from personal communication is going away with the rise of technology. And then, so now if the majority of how we interact is how I present myself on social media, which may or may not be an actual representation of my life, it's just how I want you to think my life is. And then we only text, which there's no context in the text. There's no emotion. You can't see my face. You can't hear my voice inflection. You don't know if I'm really mad at you or if I'm happy. I mean, we're losing that. And so my thoughts on how are we going to approach the rest of the world, agnostic of what country it is, who it is, what their culture is, nothing hurts from talking to them. And I do this in business all the time. I have a meeting later today where there's some internal strife over the last couple of days. And finally I said, everybody stop. No more texting, no more emailing, no more voicemails. We're going to get on a call. We're going to have this call. And I'm going to look at everybody and I'm going to say, you tell him what you told me. And you tell him what you told me.
Right.
And
Have
then
conversations.
and then we're
Have
going to talk about it.
conversations.
And maybe we agree. I don't
Communication
know.
is key.
Yeah. And if we agree, great. We find a resolution. If we don't agree, we're going to understand why we don't agree. And we're going to go on our separate ways. And maybe we go back to, an adversarial position. Maybe that leads to, in foreign relations, maybe that's going to lead to sanctions. It's going to lead to, some sort of conflict, or we're going to have a resolution. But either way, sitting down and talking about the problem is something that we need to do.
I hear that. And communication, it's such a key item, and people don't recognize. I love what you're saying. People don't recognize what you're saying, especially on text. You really, what do they really mean? Do they mean that? Do they mean this? So it's those are all good points. I had a question from my audience. What do you think about how we're doing with the fight on terrorism?
So I've been out of the military for 5 years. So 2016, January, I got out. So I don't have the intricate knowledge of what's going on right now. I would say that we have gone a good number of years with no large scale international terrorist events on our soil. That's very good. Now there's been a lot of things we don't hear about. Stuff's happening every day. There's a lot of, fine women and men who are making a difference behind the scenes every single day to ensure that happens. And that cannot be lost, that this has not happened because nobody's coming after us. This has happened because we've turned up the pressure, very quietly on both overseas and here in the U.S. to stop these things. So from that respect, we've done a very good job. And I think, we've put the pressure back on some of our allies to have to solve some of their terrorism related problems as well, which overall has probably been somewhat effective. But we'll see.
We've been talking all about military, so let me talk a little business before I've taken a lot of your time. But let's talk a little business. You are the director of global security for Snapchat. How was your experience, and why did Snapchat hire you? What was their biggest concern?
Yeah, they wanted to build a program. One of the biggest things that you bring, coming from the background that I have, is how to build holistic programs. Obviously, I believe industry is somewhat relevant, but it's more about developing a set of corporate governance and a vision around a program that I was fortunate enough to understand coming out of having to build programs across Africa and the Middle East. So identification of the problem, identification of the people who are involved in the problem, and identification of the technology that is going to be used to help solve the problem. I was very fortunate to go to Snap because they had recently gone public. So they had a whole new set of challenges on their hands as they rapidly scaled across the globe, and they wanted to professionalize and scale their global security team commensurate with their challenges now as a rapidly growing public company. And so my charge there was to go assess their global security team and then professionalize it and build it internally, leverage some external resources, but look at the technology that was being used and its scalability across the world in an integrated fashion, look at the people and develop a talent management cycle for those people and a training and development process for all the people involved in that organization that was centered around a culture and a culture of giving back and creating an environment by which the rest of the company could actually execute the core mission of the company, and really bring just some sense of global organization and control to the global security world, which, corporations deal with a tremendous amount of challenges when they operate in a variety of different countries. Every country has a different set of requirements. They have different policies with respect to governance of physical security, cybersecurity, information security. And so building a program that incorporates all of those things into one one element that can manage it is quite a monumental task that I believe we did a very good job of.
Excellent. Well, your leadership qualities are outstanding. And after Snapchat, you were both CEO and COO of Genius Fund, a vertically integrated cannabis company in LA. You were recruited originally as a chief security officer, but they quickly realized your leadership qualities and promoted you. How did you create change in that organization?
Well, cannabis is a very challenging industry. There's a tremendous opportunity in cannabis. It's all about market timing. There are very mature cannabis markets like out in California, and there are extremely immature cannabis markets like here in, for instance, like New Jersey, which is now is going to open up. But even in a market in New Jersey where you say, okay, well, it's just about to open up, it's immature. Well, that's actually moderately mature, because in order to get to that phase, there have been players involved in that at the state level for the last 5-10 years. So if you were to go to New Jersey today and say, oh, I'm going to submit for a license, I'm going to get in the game, you're actually late. You need to be way sooner in starting that process in the areas of the country that are not even discussing it, the ones that are saying, and there's no way we're ever going to go legal. Well, that's, if you're there now you may have an opportunity to be at the front end. Going into markets like California, going to Colorado, there are very established markets that have been there for a long time. And so there's a lot of challenges to kind of break in. To affect change in that industry, it requires a focus. It requires money. You have to be able to compete. There's a centralization of the industry right now. You have the massive Canadian companies that are coming into the US market. They're doing a lot of acquisition. They are consolidating the industry very quickly. You're seeing a separation of people who know how to run successful businesses versus folks who are doing it because maybe they operated in the black market, for the majority of their career, and now they've established themselves into the legitimate market, but they just don't have sound business practices. But it's an industry where you'll sit in a meeting with, on one hand, you'll have something that resembles a Wall Street banker, or a Wall Street investor in a suit there with, some sort of pro forma detailed financial statements. They're looking for some, detailed assessments on ROI. All right. And they're going through a due diligence checklist, 200 to 300 items deep. And on the other hand, you have folks who operated in the black market who don't have, may or may not have a working phone, don't take notes, don't understand the financial basis of what they're doing, but are also very skilled in product development because they've been doing this for a long time. So they know, oh, I can, this is the right concentration of different mixes. This is high quality product. This is not high quality product. And so having to bridge that gap and bring from a financial side and a business process and a business model side into an organization, but then have to take the talent and experience of folks who understand how do you get something that people actually want to buy and consume is quite a challenge as an organizational leader.
Well, it sounds like a great opportunity, but also one that has a tremendous amount of challenges. And I have all kinds of jokes in my head about it, but I'm going to save all those jokes. So let me talk about you're CEO of FR6. I mentioned that before. What exactly does your organization do?
Sure. So it's not all success, right? In these endeavors. So Genius Fund unfortunately closed in March for a variety of reasons, right when COVID happened. And so I started to put my focus into building FR6, and I immediately was like, oh, well, we'll get into security contracting. There's so many opportunities. I have all the networks. We'll be able to do it. Well, then everything shut down. So there's not a whole lot of corporate security going on during this time period because nobody's going to the office, right? So
Right. Right.
So that industry has taken a tremendous hit. And then I said, well, I'll get into government security contracting because they're still there. There's still a lot of opportunity there, but government contracting is its own beast in and of itself that requires a tremendous amount of trial and error. And so while I was going through this evolution over the summer, I started trying to find businesses that I could go into, that I could possibly acquire and bring my team of folks like me who I've worked with over the last couple of years into those organizations and grow them and scale them. And so we have a couple of acquisition targets that we're looking at right now that we're doing due diligence on. I'm working on a project in California in the restaurant industry, actually, which even though the restaurant industry has taken a tremendous hit over the last year, everybody's going to go back out. And if you were able to weather the storm over the last year and had sound fiscal conservative policies, and you were able to stay somewhat afloat, and you have some extra reserve capital, now is an acquisition opportunity for those who are ready to go the other way. And so we're working on a project there, and we are working on a project in Connecticut as well from a manufacturing facility where we have a great opportunity to acquire a business that is founder run and owned from 1988 or 1985, I believe was when they started the company, and they're looking for their exit, and they want to sell the business to somebody who's going to invest in the people, implement a sound sales and business development process, and scale that business and be a partner to them as they transition out over the next couple of years. So that's where we're at.
Well, Fran, I think I got a symbol that tells me that I think it's time to end, because I just saw your wife walk in, look in. I don't know if I got the stink eye, but I don't think so. But that is usually the symbol, like, okay, time to take your son back.
Yeah, she has the baby.
Yeah, she got the baby. So listen, you said it all. This was absolutely fantastic. Really appreciate your time. And for everybody, Fran is starting a new podcast very, very shortly. Hasn't released it yet. What's the name of the podcast, Fran?
The podcast is called the Jedburgh Podcast.
Okay. You want to tell just a little bit?
And that's going to be what I call conversations with visionaries, drivers of change, and those dedicated to winning. So the Jedburghs were an organization that was put together in 1943 to help turn the tide of World War II, when it was seemingly obvious that the Germans were in a position for victory. The Allies knew that they needed to invade Normandy to take back France, but the only way to invade Normandy was to not allow the Germans to reinforce Normandy. So they created Operation Jedburgh. They recruited 300 individuals, 100 each from the British, the French, and the American militaries. They trained them to a very high standard. These were folks who had a specific set of skills and character traits for success, but when combined, it was what was called the whole man concept, meaning they just got things done, no matter the challenge. And so they parachuted them in behind German lines the night before D-Day for the ensuing 3 to 4 weeks every single night. And they conducted sabotage and subversion operations on the German reinforcements to not allow them to get to Normandy, which allowed for the Allies to gain the beachhead. And so point of that is that these folks demonstrated talent development, preparation, introspection, drive, and they allowed victory. They were dedicated to winning, and we speak now with modern day Jedburghs in academics, in business, in athletics, who have dedicated themselves to success and have faced adversity along the way. And we'll tell those stories.
Everybody, you can find that on wherever you get your podcast. So it'll be coming out soon. Look for Fran. I just want to remind everybody also, next Coffee with Krav will be April 6th. So it's every Tuesday, 10 o'clock, first Tuesday of the month. So April 6th, we're going to have Matt DeMeo on. Matt is going to make you smarter. He helps with memorization. He helps you with remembering things. And, sometimes when you get to a certain age, you start to forget things. So Matt's going to have all great techniques on how we can all remember everything. So remember this, April 6th, next Coffee with Krav. Thank you so much, Fran. Thank you. You'll be getting your Coffee with Krav mug as well. And take care. And everyone be safe. Get your vaccinations. We'll see you next time. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Fran. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.